Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite books of all time so far. The first book I'm going to talk about is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. So I read this back in 2020 and I was actually really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I actually got the recommendation from Murphy Napier here on YouTube. So yes, I really like this one, and I really liked all the sciencey talk, even though that's definitely not my favorite subject. But I definitely loved all the sciencey talks that we had in this. I like the kind of like horror aspects of it also kind of melded in. I definitely feel this is definitely more of a science fiction thriller rather than a horror, but it was definitely very entertaining, very fast-paced. I remember I really loved the main character, just like I love him in the movies, Dr. Alan Grant, but I swear kids in books just really annoy me, and this was no exception. But besides that, the storyline was great. I loved, like I said, the way they talked about the dinosaurs. I love the science aspect of it. The pacing was really great. And I definitely highly recommend this one. My next favorite book that I'm going to talk about is Illuminae. Illuminae is the first book in the Illuminae files. Technically, I actually like the second book, Gemina, a lot better, but Illuminae was actually still a great entry. It's mainly about two characters, Katie and Ezra, who live on a planet far, far away. They get caught up in like a war going on between two rival corporations. Like they get on the ship and they're trying to escape the corporation that attacked their planet. But then when they think that they're on their way to being saved, another problem comes up when the AI for the ship that they're on turns murderous. I guess the horror elements kind of surprised me because I didn't think it'd be going that direction, but I really enjoyed the direction it took. I felt like I was on the edge of my seat for a lot of the moments in here. I didn't really care for the romance too much, honestly, but I really enjoyed their stories separately. Katie's kind of really tech savvy, and she ends up using her skills to help so many people. Ezra, on the other hand, I believe he was training to be a pilot. They each individually have their own stories of trying to survive the attack on their planet and then the attack on their spaceship. If you haven't heard, this book is actually told not like a regular book. It's actually told in a multimedia format. So it's actually really fast to get through, even though it looks super thick. It was a very interesting way of telling it and really quick. So yes, definitely recommend this one as well. The next book I'm going to talk about is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. So this book, Into the Drowning Deep, is about a young scientist named Victoria who gets invited onto this sea expedition to figure out what had happened to another ship that had gone missing out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean years previous. Now, Victoria is a young scientist, so she's partially going on it to further her own studies, but mainly she's going on it to figure out what happened to her sister. The first book was actually going on an expedition to create a mockumentary on mermaids. So these scientists actually go out to the Marianas Trench to kind of figure out if mermaids exist. This is a really good one. I found it, just like with Jurassic Park, I kind of liked all the sciencey talk. I found it really interesting. There's so many different scientists doing their own thing on the ship, so I actually really liked following the different people on the ship. I love the horror aspects. I actually did find it really creepy. I remember there's a few scenes where the characters are actually in the water, and I actually kind of found the descriptions pretty eerie and kind of accurate. Like for me, it's not that scary, but I could kind of imagine being in the character's shoes in the middle, like deep down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and just kind of not hearing anything and having all your senses kind of erased or muffled in a way when you're that far under the water. So this was actually really fascinating for me to read. The ending may have not lived up to the rest of the story, but it's still a great read and I still recommend it. All right, the fourth book I'm going to talk about is And Then There Are None by Agatha Christie. It's a classic mystery thriller. 10 strangers are lured to an isolated island mansion off the Devon coast by a mysterious UNON. At dinner, a recorded message accuses each of them in turn of having a guilty secret, and by the end of the night, one of the guests is dead. Stranded by a violent storm and haunted by a nursery rhyme counting down one by one they begin to die. Which among them is the killer, and will any of them survive? So I felt this book it's very short, so you can get through it really quickly. I really enjoyed the atmosphere of it. So it takes place on this deserted island, like this really small island in this one house that these 10 strangers all live in. I felt like the atmosphere really like sucked me in. I remember, I think I read this all in one night on my iPad, and I don't really like reading ebooks, so it has to be a really good one for me to finish it, especially that quickly. I guess maybe if I tried harder, maybe I could have tried to guess what the mystery was, but I didn't really care to do that. I was just along for the ride, and it was definitely a very thrilling one there. So the next book I want to talk about is Saving Noah by Lucinda Berry. So Lucinda Berry, I believe, is a clinical psychologist who turned her skills and her experience as a psychologist into writing contemporary thrillers revolving around people with different mental illnesses or psychological disorders. Noah is like this perfect son. He's a high school student, and he's actually considered like the perfect child. Everybody looks at him as like the a really kind, respectful teenager. He's really good in school. He does extracurricular activities. He's into sports. And all of that kind of gets turned on its head when it's discovered that he has molested 2 little girls that he was training on the elementary school swim team. So he admits this to his mom, and this story is told through his mom's point of view, which I really thought was a very smart way of telling this. You'd think at hearing that synopsis that like this book would be totally gross, and you'd expect how it's gonna end, you know how you're gonna feel about it, but I thought I knew how I was gonna feel about it. Because going into this book and hearing what it's about, you'd probably really expect that you know how you're gonna feel about it. But hearing Noah's story through the viewpoint of his mother, surprisingly, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but it actually really had me looking at things from his point of view. It really got me into his head, into the head of his, like, the person who loves him the most in this world. And I'm cringing saying it, but had me sympathizing with him, with a child molester. But hearing about what happens to molesters, the child molesters, the therapy they go through, the punishment, what happens to child molesters who get prosecuted, and just how it affects their life and how their life just comes crashing down even if they seem like they have everything together. I definitely highly recommend this one if you have the stomach for it. Okay, so the 6th book I'm going to talk about, oh my gosh, you guys have probably seen this one a million times. I'm sorry I jumped on the bandwagon late. I just started getting back into reading in 2020, and The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was in full swing popularity on YouTube. So for those of you that may have not heard, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is it's fictional, but it's told kind of like a memoir of this fictional movie star named Evelyn Hugo. It tells her life story from when she was a teenager with all her hopes and dreams and stars in her eyes, to what her life is like 7 husbands later when she's an older woman. It kind of goes through all the different phases of her life, and I swear by the end of it I really felt like she was a real person. Like, she was a real movie star. I watched her movies. I grew up saying her name in my household. Like, she felt so real. Connecting with her and her life story was completely easy. I think I read this through audio, or I listened to it on audio while I was also reading it. So this story was very impactful. Even though it's fictional, it's like the lessons that Taylor Jenkins Reid talks about in this story through Evelyn's eyes. You know, the trials and tribulations of being a woman, and especially being a woman in the movie industry, in the spotlight, the dark side of fame and the dark side of, I guess, being in the spotlight and trying to live a personal life, or trying to have a personal life when your life is so scrutinized by the people, by everybody else in the world. I loved a few of the characters, the side characters that were in her story, and I bet you guys will too. So I definitely highly recommend this. Usually when people ask me for a recommendation lots of times, like no matter what kinds of books they read, I usually recommend The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo pretty quickly and quite often. I'm not gonna talk too long about this one, but this list would not be accurate if I didn't keep it in there. So what has been my favorite book since I was a kid, and it's still one of my favorite books till now, is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. So this is actually the second book in the Strange the Dreamer duology. I have Strange the Dreamer over there. Maybe I'll just pop it up right here. Muse of Nightmares is actually the second and final part in that duology, and I absolutely love this book. Like, I can't even explain it. I can't remember the last time I was this excited reading a book. Like, it brought me back to when I was a kid and I'd stay up all night and I'd spend every waking second of the day that I possibly can trying to get through a book. That was my experience with this one. Strange the Dreamer was actually really good too. Man, I should probably describe Strange the Dreamer. So Strange the Dreamer is about a young man named Laszlo Strange who grows up being completely fascinated and obsessed with this magical faraway city. And one day when he's a little bit older, the name of the city disappears from his mind and disappears from the minds of everyone around him, and he can't explain why. It's a mystery. And then when he grows into a young man, the city is basically thought of to be a myth. That proves to be untrue one day when representatives from that city come into his town, and he takes the opportunity to kind of plead his case to them, say that he's been studying the city for so long, even though nobody believed him. He's fluent in their language and he wants to follow them back to their city so that he can see it for himself. Before I get to the last book, this is the only book on my list that I actually don't have a copy of because I just read it recently and I think the copies aren't available yet. Maybe they're doing a reprint. I think it was self-published at first and now it's being traditionally published. So the second it's available, I'm definitely going to buy it, and I'll just pop it in right here. It's called Legends and Lattes by, I don't even know who it's by, but this book is kind of different from all the other books on my list because it's a cozy fantasy about, and what is she, an ogre, an orc? She gives up her life of war and battling and violence to open up a coffee shop. Yeah, in a mythical fantasy land filled with orcs and ogres and fairies and all other kinds of magical creatures. You would think it'd be boring reading about making coffee all day and baking pastries and dealing with marketing and how to get more customers into your coffee shop, but I actually really enjoyed it. Like, it was really short, so I guess it didn't really have that much of an opportunity to be boring, but I found it really comfortable and a nice book to kind of cuddle up with and go through it. You get really attached to the characters in such a short time. The descriptions of the taste and the smell of the coffee and the taste and smell of the pastries and the camaraderie and the friendship that all these people who are involved in opening up this coffee shop, like their relationship as it grows together is just it's so sweet, and it really tugs at your heartstrings while you're reading it. And I really hope they come up with a sequel. I hope it doesn't ruin the story, but if there was another book that came out following these characters, expanding their business or something, I would 100% just take my money. I'll read it right now. So if that sounds like your cup of coffee, then definitely pick this one up. And on to my last book, and probably the biggest and most daunting one on this list. This is Words of Radiance, book 2 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. First book is actually called The Way of Kings, but the second book is my favorite, just like with Muse of Nightmares. So this story is an epic high fantasy in a completely different world with magic. So I just grabbed my copy of The Way of Kings. So this follows the story of 4 people who are in this magical land that has seen peace for the last few lifetimes until the world starts to change. And we follow 4 characters whose roles in this war or in this world, like, they have a big role in what happens, whether the world is saved or destroyed and what happens. And it really just follows these characters. We just watch them grow from book to book, but I just love these characters. I love getting into this world, like just diving straight in and having so many pages to get invested in. And I realize I'm really not just into world building, but I'm really into discovering the history of these worlds. Like, I find that really fascinating for an author, not only to create a whole new world, but also to create the backstory for it, the history, and then we just find out bits and pieces of what happened in the past as like in between what's going on in the present. I'm not really too crazy about battle scenes and war scenes and fighting scenes. It's not really my thing. But Brandon Sanderson has a very straightforward way of writing that doesn't completely lose me halfway through. I love the characters, story, the history, the world building. The magic system is really great in here too. So if you're into epic high fantasy and you have somehow not heard about The Way of Kings, I definitely recommend you get into it. And this is a very good adult high fantasy to get into because it's not so flowery, I guess, the writing. It's not too descriptive where you're just kind of getting bored halfway through. Like, Brandon Sanderson has a very accessible writing style. Like a lot of people say, it's very straightforward. You wouldn't think that how thick these books are, but it really gets straight to the point and focuses on the characters and the world building rather than how pretty the writing is, which is definitely my style. And that's it, guys. That's my top 10 favorite books of all time so far at this very moment. I feel like I have a very good mix. So at least hopefully one of these books sounds interesting to you and you can get back into reading if you haven't already, or you can find something in a whole new genre that you haven't delved into yet, or you can find the next book in your current favorite genre for you to enjoy. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video today and sticking with me after my first one, and welcome to my channel if this is your first time here with me. And please bear with me as I get more used to filming videos and being more comfortable getting filmed on camera. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!